I never thought betrayal could feel so heavy, almost like a physical weight pressing on my chest. Yet that morning, as I stood in the entryway of my own home, I realized the people I had loved the most had decided I was disposable. The sharp sting of it wasn't in the words they barely had to say anything at all. It was in the way they looked at me, as though I was a burden they'd been waiting to drop. My son, the boy I had raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights, turned his face away from mine. His wife didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. The sound of the lock clicking behind me felt final. My hands clutched the handle of my worn suitcase, the same one I had carried years ago on family vacations, back when we laughed together in the car and sang along to the radio. Now, it was stuffed with what little they allowed me to take. Memories reduced to fabric and paper. The air outside was sharp, biting my skin as I stepped off their porch. It wasn't just the cold. It was the realization that I no longer belonged in their world. I tried to keep my face calm, even though my stomach twisted and my chest ached. I had always believed family was a safe harbor, but in that moment, I understood I was just another inconvenience to them. The humiliation cut deeper than any insult could. I could still see, in my mind, the way my son had avoided meeting my eyes that had once been his comfort when he woke crying in the night. That memory clashed violently with the man who now turned his back without hesitation. The suitcase felt heavier with every step I took down the driveway. My shoes crunched against the gravel, each sound echoing like a final goodbye. Behind me, the curtain shifted, and I knew they were already erasing me from their lives. In their eyes, I was nothing more than yesterday's burden. But here's the thing about being cast aside. Sometimes the people who throw you away forget that what they discard can grow roots in unexpected places. I stood there, trembling but unbroken, the taste of betrayal sharp in my mouth. They believed they had closed the door on me for good. But what they didn't know was that I was about to turn this pain into power. Before everything fell apart, I used to believe my family was my greatest accomplishment. My life had been built around sacrifice, around giving more than I ever thought I had, just to make sure my son had what he needed. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs at a time, to keep a roof over our heads. There were nights when I skipped dinner so he could have seconds, mornings when I patched the same shirt for the 3rd time rather than admit we couldn't afford new clothes. But back then, none of it felt like a burden. It felt like love. I remember the little moments most vividly: his small hand gripping mine on the first day of school, the way his face lit up when I surprised him with a used baseball glove from the thrift store, the nights we spent at the kitchen table building science projects out of cardboard and tape. Those memories are stitched into me like a second skin, reminders of why I never gave up, even when the world seemed too heavy. When he married, I wanted so badly to welcome his wife into that circle of love. I told myself she just needed time, that her sharp comments and raised eyebrows weren't malice, just nerves. But little by little, the warmth I had once poured into that household began to freeze. She had a way of reminding me, in subtle but cutting ways, that I was an outsider in my own son's life. A misplaced coffee cup became evidence that I didn't belong. A suggestion about the children's bedtime became an accusation that I was overstepping. I brushed it off for years, telling myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was too sensitive. I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. But deep down, I knew. I saw the way she whispered in his ear when she thought I wasn't looking. I noticed how his words began to echo hers, how the distance between us grew wider with every passing holiday. Family gatherings used to be filled with laughter birthdays, where frosting ended up smeared on little cheeks. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper covering the floor like snow. But over time, even those moments changed. I found myself pushed to the edges of photographs, my stories interrupted, my presence treated as an inconvenience rather than a blessing. I became a guest in memories I had once been the heart of. The turning point wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just that they forgot to include me in plans or brushed off my help. No, the truth was harsher. I began to realize their coldness had purpose. The financial support I had once given so freely became an expectation, almost a requirement. My love was no longer enough. It had to come with a price tag. And when I hesitated, when I tried to draw a boundary, the kindness I offered was suddenly repaid with scorn. That was the moment the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The rejection, the indifference, the calculated comments. It hadn't been carelessness. It had been strategy. They didn't just want me out of their way. They wanted control. My place in their lives had shifted from mother and grandmother to resource, to something to be used until it no longer served their plans. And in that realization came the first cut of anger, sharp and deep. They weren't simply unkind, they were deliberate. Every cold smile, every closed door, every dismissal was a step in a plan that had been unfolding long before I saw it clearly. And that's when I knew what happened to me wasn't an accident. It was by design. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself with a bang. It creeps in quietly, until one morning you wake up and realize your life has been stripped bare. For me, it was the sound of a dripping faucet in a motel bathroom, echoing through a room that smelled of stale smoke and cleaning chemicals. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, the bed sagged in the middle, and the thin curtains couldn't keep out the neon glare from the gas station across the street. That tiny square of space became my entire world. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, counting the stains like they were constellations, wondering how a lifetime of sacrifice had landed me here. Holidays passed without a call. Birthdays slipped by unnoticed. Even the pictures I had brought with me, a few wrinkled snapshots of family dinners and Christmas mornings, began to feel like relics from someone else's life. I would press them to my chest at night, as if clutching them hard enough could bring back the love they once represented. Meals were simple and lonely: instant noodles, a bruised apple from the corner store, sometimes just crackers and tea. I told myself I didn't mind, but the truth was, the silence that filled that room was heavier than hunger. I had been erased, and the world outside seemed in no hurry to notice I was gone. But despair, as suffocating as it was, had its limits. Somewhere in that emptiness, a spark of memory flickered. I remembered who I had been before the years of giving everything away. I remembered the woman who had worked double shifts, balanced budgets to the last penny, and found solutions where none seemed possible. I realized that survival wasn't something new to me. It was a skill I had honed my entire life. One morning, after another restless night, I pulled myself out of bed and sat at the small desk in the corner of the motel room. I opened an old notebook I'd brought with me, filled with grocery lists and reminders. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes fell on something unexpected: a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. My late husband's handwriting stared back at me, precise and steady. It was a list of account numbers, dates, and notes I had never seen before. At first, I thought it was nothing, just records from years past, but something about it felt deliberate, like he had left it for me to find when I needed it most. That discovery jolted me awake in a way no amount of coffee ever could. It was proof that I wasn't as helpless as they wanted me to believe. There were resources, opportunities, maybe even allies I hadn't considered. My husband had always been careful, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Perhaps he had left behind more than memories. For the first time in months, I felt my chest expand with something other than grief. It was possibility. I looked around the shabby motel room, at the cracked paint and the broken heater, and instead of despair, I felt a quiet determination. This was not where my story ended. And in that moment, with a single piece of paper in my hand, I realized my downfall had already begun to turn into my rise. The motel room that once felt like a prison slowly became the starting line of my comeback. With that folded paper in hand, I began piecing together what my husband had left behind. It wasn't a fortune, not yet, but it was enough to remind me I had options. It was a safety net, a foundation I could build on. More importantly, it reminded me I had never been helpless. I started small. I walked to the library every morning, using their computers to scour job postings. The first responses were discouraging: too old, overqualified, underqualified, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I found part-time bookkeeping work for a local garden supply shop. The pay was modest, but the moment I held that first paycheck in my hands, it felt like a trophy. It wasn't just money, it was proof that I could still stand on my own 2 feet. From there, small victories began to stack up. I rented a tiny studio apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. No one could tell me to leave. I began to cook real meals again, filling the space with the smells of simmering soup and fresh bread. Slowly, the woman in the mirror started to look less like a ghost and more like myself. The job at the garden supply store opened unexpected doors. I noticed inefficiencies in their books, patterns of waste they didn't even realize were draining profits. I shared my observations quietly at first, but soon my suggestions began to reshape how they ran their business. The owner, impressed, gave me more responsibility. My hours increased. My paycheck grew. With that growth came confidence I hadn't felt in years. I poured my evenings into reading about small business management, taking free online courses, even experimenting with plants that others considered beyond saving. What started as a hobby soon turned into something more. Neighbors noticed my little balcony overflowing with greenery. One even asked if I could revive the wilted flowers her husband had given her. When I returned them healthier than before, word began to spread. Within a year, I had turned that unexpected skill into a side business. People brought me their neglected plants, and I breathed life back into them. It was symbolic as much as it was practical. Every thriving leaf felt like a declaration: being discarded doesn't mean being worthless. By the second year, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My modest bank account grew, and with it, so did my independence. I invested carefully, guided by the notes my husband had left behind. Opportunities appeared where before I would have seen only obstacles. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of the future. But just as the ground beneath me began to feel steady, the shadows of the past found their way back in. While reviewing paperwork one evening, I discovered irregular withdrawals connected to an account I hadn't touched. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the numbers didn't lie. Money I had set aside quietly, carefully had been accessed, and the trail of activity pointed back to a name I knew all too well. It wasn't enough that they had thrown me out, humiliated me, and erased me from their lives. They were still reaching into mine, quietly siphoning what they believed they had a right to. In that moment, the sense of betrayal returned sharper than ever. But this time, I wasn't the same woman who had walked away from their house with a suitcase and tears in her eyes. I wasn't broken anymore. I was prepared. As I sat there, staring at the evidence of their greed, one thought rang louder than all the others. It's time to confront them. It happened on a Saturday morning, just as the newspaper carried the article about my latest business milestone. My doorbell rang at 09:17, and when I looked through the camera, I saw them standing there, my son, his wife, and their children. For a moment, I froze. 6 years of silence, and they chose that day to show up. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. I opened the door slowly, not to welcome them, but to look them in the eye. They stood on my porch like nervous strangers, rehearsed smiles painted over desperation. I could read it in their faces, the children uncertain, the parents restless and uneasy. They hadn't come for reconciliation. They had come because they needed something. They tried to wrap their pleas in the language of family. They spoke of missing me, of wanting to rebuild what was lost, of how much the children had longed to know their grandmother. Their words floated in the air like smoke, thin and insubstantial. But I had lived long enough to know the difference between truth and manipulation, and I could see right through them. As I listened, my eyes caught on the children. Their daughter glanced at me with curiosity, as if trying to connect the woman in front of her with the ghostly figure she had only heard about. Their son shifted uncomfortably, sensing tension he didn't yet fully understand. I realized, with a pang, that they had grown up believing a version of events shaped entirely by their parents. So, I decided it was time to tell the truth. Calmly, deliberately. I explained what had happened all those years ago, the morning I was told I was no longer welcome. The suitcase shoved into my hands, the cold dismissal. I shared how I had left with nothing but memories, and how their parents had erased me from their lives, as if I had never existed. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence in the room was louder than anything I could have shouted. I saw the shock ripple across the children's faces. Confusion gave way to hurt, and then to anger, not at me, but at the people who had lied to them for years. Their eyes darted between me and their parents, searching for denial, for contradiction. But there was none, because the final blow was yet to come. I reached for the letter, the one written in my son's own handwriting years ago, when regret had briefly cracked his resolve. I placed it on the table, letting the weight of it sink into the silence. In it, he admitted everything: the lies, the weakness, the way he had chosen convenience over conscience, and the request, almost a plea, for me not to reveal it to his wife. The color drained from his face as the children leaned forward to read. His wife sputtered, tried to twist the narrative, but her words bounced off the undeniable proof lying in plain sight. The children turned on them with questions, demands, accusations. The fortress of lies they had built crumbled in real time, brick by brick. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply sat back, steady and unshaken, and let the truth do what it always does: shine light into the dark corners where deceit hides. And as the shouting faded, as the tears flowed, and the walls of denial fell, I felt a calm settle over me. I had carried the weight of their betrayal for years, but in that moment, it no longer belonged to me. It was theirs to carry. I looked at them one last time and said the words I had been holding close to my chest. They threw me away, but I bloomed where they thought I'd rot. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, my life settled into a peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking around with the weight of unspoken hurt pressing down on my chest. The truth had been laid bare, and though it had fractured what little was left of my relationship with my son and his wife, it opened something new and precious, a genuine bond with my grandchildren. They began visiting me on weekends, sometimes shy at first, sometimes bursting with questions. We cooked together in my kitchen, filling the air with the smell of cookies and stew. They asked me to tell stories about their father when he was young, stories they had never heard, because those memories didn't fit the version of me they had been told. And so, piece by piece, I gave them back the history that had been hidden from them. I saw in their eyes not pity, but curiosity, admiration, and, eventually, love. My home became alive with laughter again. The echo of children's footsteps down the hallway, the sound of board games spilling across the dining table, the comfort of knowing I was building memories with them that no one could erase. I cherished every second, knowing how close I had come to losing it all forever. Outside of family, I thrived too. The business I had built, once just a desperate attempt to survive, had blossomed into something far bigger than I ever imagined. I was no longer scraping by. I was secure, independent, and free to make choices on my own terms. Every decision I made was a reminder that I had rebuilt my life not out of charity, but out of determination and courage. And through it all, I kept learning. The greatest lesson wasn't about money or success, it was about boundaries. I realized that love, to be true, must be given freely, not demanded or manipulated. I realized that sometimes protecting your heart means walking away from people who refuse to value it. And I realized that age, loss, and betrayal don't mean the end of a story. They can be the beginning of something far stronger. Looking back now, I don't see only the pain. I see the journey. I see a woman who was cast aside and told she had nothing left to give, but who chose to rise anyway. I see resilience in the cracks, wisdom in the scars, and beauty in the parts of myself I thought were gone forever. To anyone listening who has felt discarded, underestimated, or erased, please hear me. Your worth is not defined by how others treat you. It is not measured by their approval or their acceptance. You carry within you the strength to rebuild, to bloom, even in the harshest soil. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not anger, but living so fully, so joyfully, that those who doubted you can only watch in silence. And so, as I sit here in my quiet home, the evening sun spilling across my garden, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the struggles that forced me to grow. Gratitude for the peace I fought so hard to earn. And gratitude for the love I now share with those who see me clearly. They once threw me away, but I am still here, stronger than ever, blooming in a life I created for myself. If my story touched you, if you've ever faced your own battles of betrayal or resilience, I would love to hear from you. Share your journey in the comments. because your voice matters more than you know. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we are not alone.